on the air with new details tonight out of a Manhattan courthouse on what's looking like the final steps, maybe before possibly historic indictment of former President Trump. And with the legal fallout still up in the air, the political fallout is becoming more clear today. Ahead, why some say it's time for the former president to face justice. Plus, new reaction just coming into us from the White House on this key meeting between Russia's Vladimir Putin and China's Xi Jinping, as those two leaders talk about how to end the war in Ukraine. We're live from Norway. And with Alec Murdaugh in prison, the attention is now turning to his son as investigators are re-examining the 2015 death of a teenager. Our team has the first reaction from Buster Murdaugh, who says he has nothing to do with that teen's death. Plus, in tonight's Backstory, we'll take you live to the ground in Baghdad with our Richard Engel on 20 years of covering the Iraq War, how he's seen the country and the world change in those 2 decades. And the NHL says hockey is for everyone. But why are players across the league refusing to participate in Team Pride Nights? We'll talk about how this is triggering some backlash in the LGBTQ plus community a little bit later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and in the last few hours, we're learning the Secret Service is getting ready for something we've never seen before. The potential indictment of a former president, in this case, Donald Trump, maybe as early as this week. He seems to think tomorrow. The legal fallout still TBD, but the political backlash is just starting, as a grand jury is now wrapping up its investigation into alleged hush money payments to former adult film star Stormy Daniels. Here's what we're finding out today and what's next. As we speak, you've got the city getting ready for protests. Why? Because Mr. Trump told his supporters to do just that, to get out there and demonstrate. You can see some of the barriers that were being brought at the Manhattan DA's office. You've got jurors hearing from the last witness today, Robert Costello. He's the former attorney to Michael Cohen. Cohen was going to testify, too, as a rebuttal witness. Our team has just found out prosecutors told Cohen, not necessary. He can go home. Mr. Trump denies he did anything wrong. He's making those denials very clear on his Truth Social platform today. But a lot of the Republicans are circling the wagons for him, too. You've got his allies on Capitol Hill sending a letter first obtained by NBC News. You see it here. They're asking that Manhattan district attorney to testify in front of lawmakers. They're accusing him of messing with the 2024 election. And then there's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican, of course, both attacking that DA and needling Donald Trump. Here's how we went after the New York prosecutor. Listen.
And he chooses to go back many, many years ago to try to use something about porn star hush money payments. You know, that's an example of pursuing a political agenda and weaponizing the office.
We're going to break down the politics with our Ali Vitale in just a minute, but I want to start with Vaughn Hilliard outside Mar-a-Lago in West Palm Beach, Florida. Vaughn, let's lay it out, right? Because it feels like the biggest question anybody wants to know today is Mr. Trump going to be indicted? Is it going to happen this week? And the appearance of these two witnesses has a lot of people trying to read the tea leaves here. You've got one of today's witnesses trying to cast doubt on the other at what could be the 11th hour. Bottom line, what do we know about what's going to happen?
Right, and that is where we, Hallie, have been having the conversation, knowing that charges against Donald Trump could be filed at any hour. And the news of today was the fact that there were other witnesses that were prepared to come forward and that the grand jury's work was not done. Robert Costello, of course, being that potential Trump ally that could go before the grand jury here today and testify, undercutting Michael Cohen's credibility. When you look at some of the points that Robert Costello, before going in to speak to the grand jurors today, was prepared to lay out, he was prepared to suggest that Michael Cohen had embellished his allegations against Donald Trump. He had suggested that that Michael Cohen wanted to make the claim that he was the fixer who could take care of it. He blames Trump for his difficulties. He said that he told Costello that he was suicidal in 2018. All of this goes to the alleged mental state of Michael Cohen as to why he could be making these allegations against Donald Trump. Of course, these are serious allegations that Robert Costello was prepared to make to the grand jury. But Michael Cohen is the key witness here in this testimony, potentially against Donald Trump. Now, why is Donald Trump, or why is Michael Cohen, I should say, potentially credible? Well, number one, he's testified for hundreds of hours to not only federal prosecutors. He testified as part of the Mueller probe. He testified to New York Attorney General and to now the Manhattan District Attorney, all as part of their multiple probes here. As to why he is potentially not a credible witness here, you have the likes of, in 2018, him pleading guilty to federal charges coming out of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, Hallie, to lying in the past to congressional investigators, but also what the investigators said was a pattern of deception over the course of years in which he not only evaded taxes, but also lied to benefit the likes of Donald Trump. Now, the question here is, do the grand jury, do they, number one, take his word? And number two, to what extent do they have corroborating evidence to back up the claims of Michael Cohen against Donald Trump?
Again, the reason why all this matters, you know, this or that, or this was or that witness, is about this case that the DA in Manhattan is trying to make on hush money payments, where this indictment may or may not come, possibly tomorrow, maybe later in the week. Like, we really, really don't know. Donald Trump, though, does know one thing, that he is trying to get on defense here. Even in the last few minutes, as we've been on air, he's got another video out on his Truth Social platform. He's defending himself. He's got a new filing defending himself in a different investigation in Georgia, too. The word of the day is defense, even as he's also trying to raise money off this whole thing.
Right, he's trying to raise money, and he's trying to capitalize this, at least for the Republican primary purposes. He's putting pressure on others, like Ron DeSantis, who you just played, Nikki Haley, to come and speak out and essentially build a cavalry of support around him. He is trying to fundraise off this, and he is trying to suggest to Republican voters that this is not an attack just on him, but it's an attack on them in this MAGA conservative movement. And in order to stand up to the politicization of these prosecutors' offices, they need Donald Trump, because nobody is going to be able to take them on like he is. That is the case that he is making. And when he is facing not only this investigation, but other inquiries, he's got to find a way to be able to frame this to his benefit, Hallie.
That tees us up. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you very much for us live in West Palm. That tees us up very nicely for somebody else who is in Florida, Ali Vitale in Orlando. She's there because House Republicans are there for their annual retreat. It also happens to be obviously not too far from where Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis is. What was so interesting about DeSantis today, Ali, was there were days that had gone by that he didn't say anything about the potential for a Donald Trump indictment. Unlike other Trump allies, Matt Gaetz, for example, who came out, Kevin McCarthy, defending the former president. Now DeSantis comes out just today, defends the former president, but also, like, needles him a little bit. Watch.
I don't know what goes into paying hush money to a porn star to secure silence over some type of alleged affair. I can't speak to that.
Crowd laughed at that moment, right? DeSantis kind of being like, oh, I don't know what it's like to pay hush money to a porn star here. It is a fine line, because on the one hand, he is, if he does run for president, as everybody expects in 2024, he doesn't want to upset Donald Trump's base because he wants those votes. At the same time, he's got to put some space between himself and Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, Hallie, you know who felt that shade was the people in Trump world who were waiting for Ron DeSantis to say something. They noted the fact that he had kept quiet in the intervening days between when Trump started posting about this and ultimately this morning when DeSantis had a press conference for an entirely separate issue. He wasn't there to talk about Trump, but certainly that was a question that was ultimately asked. But then also the way in which he responded to it, which is not just to say that he needled Trump a little bit, though that was certainly something that caught people's attention, but also the way that he said that he really didn't want to get involved in this. He did toe the line in terms of echoing what I've been hearing here from Republican lawmakers and leadership, saying that this is someone who's Soros-backed and making it political. But he also said he doesn't want a part in this. He tried to distance himself, too.
Yeah, for sure. One of the other things he did when he went after Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan district attorney, as so many Republicans have done, is he called him a so-called Soros DA. This is a line we've heard again and again from Republicans who are jumping to the former president's defense here, going up against Alvin Bragg. George Soros, to remind people, is this, you know, very, very wealthy liberal donor. His name is often invoked in conservative circles as a kind of boogeyman for liberal progressive causes here. Explain the linkage between George Soros and Alvin Bragg. What is the meat to the potatoes, if you will, on this attack line, Ali?
Yeah, look, it is the thing that most conservatives and Republicans are pointing to, because it's easy to say that someone is backed by someone else because of the way that you're allowed to donate to political candidates. Bragg is someone who was elected in Manhattan. This is a city that is pretty Democratic overall, so it's not entirely surprising that they would elect someone on that side of the spectrum. But this is, again, them trying to go at an issue, making it political, when in fact, you got to imagine that the DA's office has followed the letter of the law on this as they've tried to push forward. So look, we'll see ultimately what and if these charges are. There's still a lot that we don't know about this. But I think what's clear from being here in Florida is we were always going to be talking about Trump down here no matter what. But what we're watching happen is the way that they're actually putting the teeth into having a House majority. They're mounting investigations, not even waiting for any kind of indictment or prosecution to be official. They're just going at it and telling Bragg, hey, we want you to come talk to us in front of any of these committees, oversight, judiciary, or admin. They're going at it regardless.
Real quick, Hallie, did Kevin McCarthy say anything late this afternoon? I know he was maybe going to take some questions from folks. Did that happen or no?
Yeah, last night we did hear from him, and I asked him if he condoned Trump asking for protests and Trump saying, take our country back. This is a mirror image to the kind of language that he was using before January 6th. It's something that you cannot unlink from this current moment. Yeah. McCarthy, though, sort of seeking to be a kind of Trump interpreter when I asked him about this, saying, no, Trump didn't mean that. He was just trying to educate people. He didn't want it to be harmful, and saying he doesn't condone those protests. But, I mean, we can all read, and we read what the former president wrote.
Ali Vitale live for us in Orlando. Thank you. To international news now, because the Biden administration tonight is saying it is not in China's best interest to help Russia in its invasion of Ukraine as the Chinese president begins his 3-day visit to Moscow. Listen to what National Security spokesperson John Kirby had to say.
We don't think it's in their best interest. It's not going to bring an end to this war any faster. And as I said earlier, it certainly appears inconsistent with what President Xi has said publicly about what he wants to see happen.
Here you see Xi and Putin today. They are meeting in Moscow for the very first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's why this is such a significant moment. For Beijing, they see this meeting as a chance to establish itself as a global leader. For Moscow, it's a big show of solidarity against the West, especially after the International Criminal Court put out that arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin's arrest for war crimes in Ukraine. Keir Simmons is joining us now. So we've laid out what each country wants from this, what China wants from this, what Russia wants from this. Yeah. And it was quite the welcome for Xi. Red carpet, a lot of police, an honor guard playing music. Talk about the reaction where you are, near where you are.
Yeah, I mean, China isn't going to be interested, well, exactly. China isn't going to be interested, really, honestly, Hallie, in listening to what the White House has to say about its interests. Listen, the international picture right now is mind-blowingly complex, like three-dimensional chess, right? But if you want some kind of diplomatic straight talk, it's a pretty uncomfortable day for Ukraine and NATO and the US sitting on the sidelines watching this. Yes, it's a diplomatic victory for President Putin. I mean, just look at the optics, standing there with the leader of the world's second largest superpower, who calls him my friend, says next year I'm sure you'll be re-elected by the Russian people. For President Xi, China's leader, slightly more tricky. This is effectively what he's facing, what he's trying to do. He's trying to support Russia, this huge neighbor to China. He's trying to assert himself on the world stage against the US. And at the same time, he's trying to maintain China's economic links to the West. Not easy. And that is why I think in the West and in Washington, they can watch from the sidelines without being overly worried yet.
Well, speaking of the reaction from the West, let me play for you what the Secretary of State here in the U.S. had to say about this visit.
The fundamental element of any plan for ending the war in Ukraine and producing a just and durable peace must be upholding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Any plan that does not prioritize this critical principle is a stalling tactic at best, or is merely seeking to facilitate an unjust outcome.
The way that the West has been responding to this invasion of Ukraine has been clear, Keir. You have Western nations like the U.S. and allies giving Ukraine a lot of help. More today coming in from the U.S., $350 million worth. The White House is going, hey, China, we think that you are maybe going to give Russia some help, right, in the form of potentially lethal military aid, et cetera. China denies that. China has said that's not the case. But that is also, as you have laid out, that is a big piece of this here, too.
Oh, yeah, it absolutely is. And, you know, look, China is already helping Russia economically and with supplies, not that lethal military aid as you mentioned, again, it's back to the point I made. China wants to sustain Russia. It doesn't want to see President Putin out of office. It doesn't want to see Russia collapse. But at the same time, and it's so important, it's trying to maintain particularly its economic relationship with Europe. So, listen, is China capable of clandestine weapon supplies to Russia? It certainly is, but it also understands the optics of all this. And I think it's important to see the difference. There were two op-eds by President Xi, President Putin today. President Putin talking about China and Russia together against America. President Xi talking a little bit more in a statement that you can see here, a little bit more about negotiations, but at the same time asserting his world view. Again, it's more complex for China than it is for Russia ultimately. But right now, they both need each other.
So over the next 2 days, Keir, as this visit continues, are we going to expect to see any big major moment? I know there's the signing of some documents that are expected, but what do we think is going to happen here before Wednesday?
Oh, I think China's got a lot to gain. I mean, there's a gas pipeline that it could get. It could potentially get some agreements, or nuclear agreements with Russia. There's lots of things that China could get from Russia as a quid pro quo, if you like, for its support. I also think you will see potentially some kind of announcement of some kind of deal over Ukraine. Trouble is, of course, Ukraine isn't going to buy it, nor is the West, because unless China says withdraw from Ukraine to Russia, then it just doesn't really seem to go anywhere.
Keir Simmons, glad to have you live for us there in Norway on an important night, an important week. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Right now, officials in Miami Beach are talking about a new curfew set to start midnight on Thursday after 2 deadly shootings right at the peak of spring break. And today we're seeing new surveillance video from one of those shootings. We've got to warn you here. It is disturbing. You can see people right here walking by when there's a group of 4. One man in that group of 4 pulls out a gun. You see him? Fires at somebody else. We obviously froze the video here so as not to show the actual shooting. This person fires a few times, then runs away. You see that part there. This happened early Sunday morning. There was another shooting Friday a few blocks away, each killing one person, hurting another, both suspects caught. And you can see it on this map. Both shootings happened on Ocean Drive. If you know Miami Beach, that's like the main drag. That's where everybody goes out. Police say that these were isolated incidents, but this has been a problem for Miami Beach for the last 2 years, right around spring break, when the city has had to put in place states of emergency. Guad Venegas is in Miami Beach for us tonight. I understand that this meeting with Miami Beach officials is still going on even as we speak now, Guad. Do we know what else will come out of it other than the curfew, or is that the big headline at the moment?
Well, Hallie, I should also tell you that shooting that happened where you showed the security video, that was just down the street from us here in Ocean Drive. So the meeting was scheduled for city officials to make this decision, right, to implement the state of emergency and curfew into next weekend. We've been listening to that meeting, and they are also discussing alternatives to increase security. One of the commissioners mentioned that maybe bringing in metal detectors for this area could help, because one of the biggest problems that the mayor noted is the amount of guns that are being brought into the area, both of these deadly incidents involving firearms. The mayor also said that they've been able to get firearms that people were carrying in this area, confiscating about 70 of them. Here's part of that meeting that's happening right now.
We have been through this scene for several years in a row. How many times? It is never going to be okay for me to see a dead person on our street. These are people with families, with friends who are in mourning right now.
That's part of the conversation being had right now with city officials making this decision, which we expect to ultimately implement the state of emergency and curfew into next week. And as you mentioned, Hallie.
Guad, you know, we've been showing, and we showed a little bit, people running away, right, when these shootings were happening along the main strip there in Miami Beach. You see it here, what the scene was like sort of in the aftermath. On the one hand, that's scary to see, right? It's scary to experience being around a shooting like that. On the other hand, there is this sense, are spring breakers gonna spring break no matter what? Has this had any impact on the folks that you're talking to here who are visiting, who are coming in from out of town for spring break?
Well, Hallie, officials are saying that the spring breakers that come here to spring break are not the ones that are involved in these deadly incidents. They mentioned some of them come to the beach, they hang out during the day, and then they go somewhere else. A lot of these incidents are taking place late at night. So essentially this curfew that began at midnight last night, went from midnight to 6 a.m., would not affect the people that were here during the day and would maybe go to one of these businesses later at night. It's the late hours, and it's a lot of the people also that the city officials mentioned, it's visitors that are coming in. It's It's not local. So it is going to affect the people that are spring breaking and the locals, but they're mainly trying to prevent the violent individuals that are involved in these incidents between midnight and 6 a.m., Hallie.
Guad Venegas, thank you very much in Miami for us watching all of this. A potentially deadly infection from a fungus is spreading, with the CDC now sounding the alarm tonight, warning people this is serious for older folks, like if you have a parent or a grandparent in a nursing home. Cases of what's called CRS tripling between 2020 and 2021. And part of what's so concerning here is that it's not easy to treat. This kind of infection is resistant to most drugs. I want to show you how much it's been spreading since 2016, from 4 states then reporting cases to 21 states now. Nobody is in freak-out mode yet, to be clear. This is still rare. It's not a threat to folks who are otherwise generally healthy. Dr. John Torres is with me now to break this down. And Dr. John, while it is not like freak-out mode yet, there is a concern that this, and I don't want to overstate it here, but the worry that perhaps this could develop into the next MRSA. I think people know that as that sort of drug-resistant infection that you can pick up and that can be pretty scary.
And Hallie, the thing of it is the World Health Organization said this is a global issue, so not just here in the U.S., but around the globe. And since 2016, we started to see these cases expand and expand. For most of us who are healthy, have intact immune systems, not an issue, because the fungus has a hard time getting into our body, and if it does, our immune system can fight it very well. But for those who are in nursing home, long-term care facilities, if they have invasive procedures done, if they have IV catheters inside, if they're on a ventilator, the fungus can get inside that way, and their immune systems are weak and can't fight it off. And so that is part of the problem there. So what can you do about it as a regular person? Well, number one, stay as healthy as possible. That's the obvious thing to say. But if you have a loved one inside one of these facilities, talk to the facility about their procedures, because this is what we call a nosocomial infection. In other words, a nurse or an aide will get it from one patient and accidentally take it to another patient. And the authors of the study say they think this is happening because during the pandemic, the COVID procedures were essentially different procedures than you needed to keep this clean. And so they're saying there's an issue right there. Hopefully that's being corrected, Hallie.
What's interesting, too, about this fungus is that, according to our reporting, experts think that it originated, or like it came from or got worse because of climate change. Explain that.
Exactly. And the fungus has been around forever, essentially, but it did not really affect humans. It likes cold environments or cool environments. And that's why some of these fungi you can see affect our skin or our toenails, because they're cooler areas of our body. But once this fungus starts being able to adapt to warmer environments, it can get inside our bodies, which are 98.6. And they think the climate warming has caused them to adapt to warmer environments, meaning they can get inside our bodies and manifest themselves that way. And the concern is that this is going to continue and perhaps even worsen as the climate change worsens, Hallie.
Definitely something to watch. Dr. John, thank you.
You bet.
Nice little rebound in the markets late this afternoon, with Wall Street seeming to feel pretty good about the news that Credit Suisse, which has been having some problems, is getting taken over by another bank. You've got the Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ, all ending the day. Here's a sentence we haven't said much lately. All ending the day in the green, up, as we head into another potential roller coaster of a week. That's after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and the concern Credit Suisse would also fail. Caleb Silver is joining us now. So kind of a sigh of relief from the markets. We know that the markets are not the economy, but it is an indicator of where the economy is. I am a regular person. Help me understand what I should take away from this. I'm not an investor. I don't watch CNBC. What do we need to know?
Yeah, a nice little green day on the equinox. Who doesn't love that? But a little optimism coming back, maybe because there's some stability in the banking sector, at least with UBS buying Credit Suisse over the weekend for $3 billion. That takes care of that problem for now. But still, there's some unsettling stuff happening across U.S. regional banks, though a big rally in the stocks of U.S. regional banks today. That helped lift the market higher. But, you know, Hallie, the market was actually up the last week as well. Not the banking sector, but the broader market. Why? Because big tech stocks have been rallying. They drive the market higher. So if you're a normal, everyday investor and you're just investing through your 401k or on the side, you don't have to do anything right now. But it's an intense week because the Federal Reserve is making a decision on interest rates this Wednesday, and a lot is in the balance.
What do we think is going to happen on Wednesday?
Well,
I mean, why does it matter?
Yeah, the probability is the Fed's going to continue to raise interest rates, probably another 0.25%, because they're dealing with inflation. But all of a sudden, it has this new problem, which is the banks and making sure there's enough liquidity in the banking system to make sure no more banks go under. So it's fighting two battles at once. We'll see what the Fed does, but more importantly, what the Fed says, because words matter right now. So we'll be listening closely to Chairman Powell on Wednesday afternoon.
Caleb, thank you very much. Coming up here on the show, it's President Biden's very first veto ever. The Republican bill he's killing coming up in the 5 things. And later, the French president has survived a no-confidence vote that could have collapsed his government. So what does that mean for the protests? We'll tell you coming up. Another big round of layoffs coming to Amazon. We'll tell you how many more people are losing their jobs in our 5 things in just a minute. But first, Buster Murdaugh, the son of convicted double murderer Alec Murdaugh, is going on defense today. He says the attention shouldn't be on him, while the family of a South Carolina teenager found dead in 2015 works to re-examine how he died. In a new statement first to NBC News, Buster Murdaugh is denying any involvement in the death of Stephen Smith and asks that media outlets, in his words, stop publishing defamatory comments and rumors about me. If you're wondering who Stephen Smith is, he was 19 when police found him dead on a road 15 miles from the Murdaugh home. We want to be clear here. NBC News has not confirmed this, but there's been some speculation and documentaries on Netflix and HBO from people who knew both Buster and Stephen that they went to the same high school, that they may have known each other or even had some kind of an intimate relationship. That's led to all sorts of theories, none of which have been fully substantiated, making a connection between Buster and Stephen's death. The medical examiner said Smith died from a hit and run, but Smith's mom says she's not buying it. She's now working to have her son's body exhumed via a GoFundMe page that's raised nearly $70,000 so far. The family hopes that an independent medical examiner will find more evidence surrounding the teenager's death. The lawyers for Smith's family, they're trying to be clear about one thing, that their work to reopen this case is not about Buster Murdaugh or the Murdaugh family. Listen.
Buster, as we know, has nothing to do with this. And whatever is mentioned in the records, that's what investigators are going to look at. But we have no knowledge at all about Buster or the Murdaughs having anything to do with this right now. We're starting with a fresh set of eyes.
A fresh set of eyes, he says. It's all coming less than a month after Buster Murdaugh's father, Alec Murdaugh, was found guilty of murdering his wife and son. Again, Buster Murdaugh has not been charged with any crimes in this case. NBC's Katie Beck is following this story for us. Okay, Katie, so talk us through what we know about why you have Buster Murdaugh, the reps, coming out now to put out this statement and to sort of push back on what they see as all this media attention.
Well, I think now that Smith's family is making this push for the independent investigation and another autopsy, I think Murdaugh had sort of seen this come to a head before and said, listen, I've been trying to live my life in privacy. I've been grieving the death of my mother and my brother, saying in this statement, even the incarceration of his father, he's trying to cope with that. And he says, in his words, he has been targeted and he has been harassed by these possible insinuations that he had something to do with this. So I think seeing where this was going and seeing the attention that this cold case is getting, this renewed interest after the Murdaugh trial, I think he just wanted to put out there finally and unequivocally that in his own words, he had nothing to do with these, that they're baseless rumors, and then go back to living a private life and go back to grieving, as he says, missing his brother and his mother terribly, in his own words.
Talk to us about then the sort of Smith family's perspective here, because there's all this money being raised to exhume Stephen Smith's body, to have it re-examined. And thinking through the end goal here, is this not something that investigators had thought to do previously? Or like, what is the, in this instance, what is the latest, if there's anything that we're hearing from the police side of things, from the law enforcement side of things, given these developments?
Yeah, sure. SLED has said that this case is ongoing. They are making progress. We have heard nothing from them about any plans to do any exhumations. In terms of the Smith family, what they're going to have to do is get the permission of a judge. It is really in a judge's hands to decide whether or not that can happen. They have to, through their lawyers, petition the court and ask for permission to exhume the body of Stephen Smith. Once the judge signs off on that, they will privately do that exhumation and then do another autopsy with an independent pathologist. That is their hope, that their request will be approved. In the meantime, Smith's mother says that she still lives every day with this open question of not knowing and really believing that this was not a hit and run, that this was a murder, that her son was targeted, and she wants to know the who and the why. Here's what she said to us in our interview.
As a mother, there's questions that I need to ask, and there's questions I need answers to. Peace, not closure. It'll never be closed because he's forever gone.
Now, they have raised, as you said, quite a bit of money, Hallie, over $70,000 at this point in this GoFundMe account to try and, support these efforts of an independent review and a new autopsy. But Stephen Smith's mother says even if they get denied the access to do this exhumation, they will put that money towards a scholarship fund in Stephen's name. That is the plan if, in fact, they are not given permission to do what they want to do here.
Katie Beck, thank you very much for bringing us up to speed and for staying on top of this story. Appreciate it. Of course, you can catch more of Katie's reporting tonight on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, 6:30 Eastern, wherever you watch your local NBC station. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, you've got Supreme Court justices hearing arguments today on a case that could have a big effect on a lot of folks in the Navajo Nation and their water rights. The Native American tribe says a treaty they signed in 1868 with the U.S. government should give them access to fresh water from the Colorado River. If the court agrees, the government may have to divert some of the water from that river, which is already running low, to the reservation. Number 2, a jury in Florida today finding 3 men guilty of the murder of rapper XXXTentacion. He was 20 years old when he was shot just outside Miami in 2018. All 3 men pleaded not guilty, but were convicted of first-degree murder and armed robbery. Number 3, officials today found the bodies of 2 Florida boaters who went missing on a lake near Legoland, that theme park. They apparently jumped into some rough water to help a woman from their group who was having trouble swimming. She was rescued by others, but the men drifted away from the boat and drowned. Number 4, Amazon is announcing more layoffs today, saying 9,000 people will be let go. That's on top of the 18,000 the company already laid off in January. Number 5, President Biden using his presidential veto for the first time today. He blocked a Republican push to ban companies from considering outside factors when managing retirement accounts. That means considering things like climate change or pending lawsuits, etc. Republicans say taking those things into account is just the government going, in their words, woke. So to come here on the show, our Richard Engel is back in Baghdad 20 years after the U.S. invaded Iraq. We're talking to him about covering that war, what it was like then, and what it's like there now for our backstory tonight. Stay with us. There's this story we've got coming up in the local that is not quite snakes on a plane, but it is still kind of gross. We'll tell you where Border Patrol agents found some little snails and why they're such a big problem later on. But first, we are seeing more protests in France tonight after a vote failed that would have collapsed the French president's government. A lot of the demonstrators wanted Emmanuel Macron out after he forced through a bill last week that raises the retirement age in France. It used to be 62, now it's 64. The National Assembly's vote to take down Macron's government was close. It failed by only 9 votes in the first vote. But none of it's doing anything to slow down these protesters. A national strike, you can see some of the demonstrations here. A national strike is planned for Thursday. It's affecting transportation. It's affecting garbage. Garbage has been piling up since trash collectors walked off the job. Megan Fitzgerald is live for us in Paris. Okay, so let's take stock of where we are. The vote didn't pass. The protests will keep going. Is this just what life in France and French politics is going to look like for a little bit in the near future?
It's a great question. You know, we actually were asking protesters just that, and they said, look, this is just the start of many more demonstrations to come because they're frustrated. They're angry. You're looking at, nearly 70% of the French public that were opposed to this bill and the way in which Macron pushed it past Parliament without having a vote. To understand the anger is to understand French society here. I mean, you're looking at a society where they really value this work-life balance, where, they have 35-hour work weeks. They take their vacations. They really enjoy spending time with their families. And so they also say that they pay higher in taxes than most other European countries, and as a reward, they want to retire early at 62 years old. That certainly is not happening. We know that protests are expected in the coming days ahead, and as you mentioned, we're looking at a national strike on Thursday that could bring this country to a standstill. Hallie?
Macron survived this vote, right? What does that survival tell us about the strength of him and his party right now? What can we read into that?
I mean, he narrowly survived this, as you mentioned,
Right.
just by 9 votes in that first motion. So, I mean, what this tells you is that this is a president in crisis. But you also kind of take a look at the bigger picture here. He made this decision to push this legislation through in the first year of his second term. So he's got 4 more years to go. How effective will he be when he doesn't have the support of many lawmakers, even people within his own party? So how effective will he be in the coming years ahead? But also, on the other side of it, he does have 4 years to try and paint the narrative and redefine the legacy that he will leave behind for his presidency, if in fact he's able to get things done. Hallie.
Megan Fitzgerald live for us there in France. Megan, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up, it looks like the NHL may have some problems with their Pride Nights. Why some players and whole teams are choosing not to participate. Stay with us. Tomorrow night, the Dallas Stars hockey team will host Pride Night, with players set to take the ice for warm-ups wearing Pride-themed jerseys. You can see they'll use rainbow tape on their sticks. At least that's the plan. But on Saturday night, the goalie for the San Jose Sharks, James Reimer, chose to sit out warm-ups rather than wear the Pride gear, he says because of his Christian faith. Back in January, it was Philadelphia Flyers player Ivan Provorov, who's Russian, who also did not participate in Pride Night warm-ups, also because of religious concerns. And some teams decided that nobody at all should wear the Pride jerseys. The New York Rangers in January left him in the locker room during warm-ups, saying in a statement, "We support everyone's individual right to respectfully express their beliefs." Same with the Minnesota Wild players just last week, saying they made that decision so that the players who chose not to didn't draw any attention away from the true reason behind the night. Mark Lazarus, senior writer for The Athletic, joins us now. Mark, explain what's going on here. Why is Pride Night becoming apparently semi-controversial in the National Hockey League?
Yeah, they've been doing these Pride Nights for a number of years now, and it's never been an issue before. But then you have, when Ivan Provorov sat out back in January, it became a big deal. The Flyers are leaders in this space. Captain Scott Lawton among them, spoke out that this means a lot to us. We're still going to go out there and wear the jerseys. It's not a big ask. It's just during warmups. It's not during the game. They put some rainbow tape on their stick. They auction off the stick and the jerseys and for charity. And it's a nice event, and it's been going on for years. But now, since the Provorov situation, now you have a lot of teams that are doing this. Like you mentioned, the Wild and the Rangers chose not to completely. And part of that, they're citing there's a draconian Russian law against, LGBTQ so-called propaganda. Some players are worried about their families at home, certainly a legitimate reason. Some people are citing their religious beliefs, and some teams are choosing to protect their teammate from some bad PR rather than support the cause. When the Sharks, when James Reimer sat out, what was encouraging was Logan Couture's out there saying this still matters to us, and the team went out there and still wore the jerseys.
Go back to something you said that was interesting on the Russian connection here to this. Explain that a little bit more. Pull that thread.
Well, I mean, there's certainly a sizable Russian presence in the NHL. A lot of the game's big stars, Kirill Kaprizov in Minnesota being one of them. And Kaprizov had a harrowing ordeal last offseason trying to get out of Russia, when the war broke out with Ukraine. So there are certainly legitimate reasons to be worried. If you have family back in Russia, some players are worried about saying anything about, the war, or anything about Putin, for fear of any kind of retaliation or the inability to go back home. But plenty of Russian players have worn these jerseys too, and there's been no documentation of any incidents happening. Right. Whether they're really paying attention to, an NHL regular season game warm-up or not seems debatable.
What is also interesting here is the way that different professional sports leagues in this country are handling social issues in different ways, right? You think about the NFL, let's say, and the way that they've handled social justice issues. The NBA, where some players have been really outspoken on issues like Black Lives Matter. What have you seen from the LGBTQ plus community as it relates to some of these questions around Pride Night in the Hockey League?
They're disappointed. They're frustrated. They're not surprised. I mean, the NHL has long had kind of a hard right streak in it, for lack of a better term. It's a more conservative league. It's a very, very white-dominated league. It's, it doesn't look like the NBA. The WNBA has been leaders in this space. NBA has, NFL, like you said. The NHL made some, kind of token gestures during the summer of 2020 after George Floyd. There's the Hockey Diversity Alliance is out there now trying to make some headway in this space with, some prominent players and some former players. But the NHL, it's odd because the NHL has this "Hockey is for everyone" campaign. In a lot of ways, they've been, out in the front in this arena, trying to, make their fan base more welcoming, create more entry points for fans to feel comfortable in a hockey setting. But then events like this just, it sets everything back, and you have people wondering, how do I love a sport that doesn't love me back?
Mark Lazarus with The Athletic. Mark, thank you so much. It is so interesting. We'll see what happens, of course, tomorrow night in Dallas. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Western Bureau, somebody had to be rescued by helicopter from a river in Arizona. Officials say 2 men were kayaking when they became separated. One of the kayaks actually flipped over. Obviously, the chopper went in, got him out. From our Northeast Bureau, Apple Maps is getting kind of a makeover in Boston. Look at this. These are 3D images of the city. If you use Apple Maps instead of like Waze or Google Maps, it'll be an extra, I guess, benefit for you to navigate your way through big cities with more detail. From our Midwest Bureau, a man was caught at the Detroit airport trying to bring 6 giant African snails from Ghana into the U.S. These are them. He was stopped by a customs agent who took the snails away from him. The snails can be a health risk to humans, can also be kind of harmful to ecosystems as well. When we come back, why the cast of Ted Lasso, what did I just say? Look at them. They're very famous. There's Jason Sudeikis, a.k.a. Coach Lasso himself. We'll talk about why they were meeting with the president and what else we heard from Sudeikis and co. coming up. So take a look at this town in the Central Valley of California we're about to show you. People are literally using boats to get to their houses, right? That was a street. That guy should be in the car. He's not. He's in a rowboat here because there's so much rain, and snow that they got is melting. So that means rivers are overflowing their banks because the water levels are so high. On top of all of this, another atmospheric river is on the way, bringing even more rain, more wind, more snow. The 12th atmospheric river of the season. Let's get right to meteorologist Bill Cairns. The atmospheric river is in the sky, right, which makes the rivers on the ground really, really full. That's what's causing some of these problems here.
That's a good way to look at it. And also, atmospheric rivers come from the tropics, so they're warm, and so we're going to melt in the snow at the same time as getting the rain. And Hallie, it's going to be all about the levee systems in California. So here's our latest atmospheric river. Often they start by Hawaii. Sometimes we call them pineapple expresses for obvious reasons. But that moisture plume from the tropics is heading right for southern and central California again. This is going to move in tomorrow morning. The timing of the last one was during the overnight hours. We didn't have a lot of impacts. People weren't driving around as much. It was perfect. It was 3 inches of rain, middle of the night. This is different. This is heavy rain at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning from San Francisco Bay, moving on shore here to Santa Barbara to Los Angeles, and eventually during the late morning into San Diego. It continues during the morning rush hour. I paused this at 6 p.m. Still periods of heavy rain isolated from Los Angeles along the coast. So how much rain are we talking this time? Last storm, we had 3 inches of rain in L.A. That's like 25% of what they normally get in an entire year. So that was a huge amount. And now we're going to get about another 1 to 2 inches of rain. So not as heavy, but that timing is what's going to be bad. And as we just showed you the pictures, a lot of the rivers and the levees are all full. So will the levees hold? Will they break? Will we get more flooding? That's what happened last time. Snow will happen at the high elevations, even in the mountains outside of L.A., the San Gabriels and the San Bernardinos, and we will see about another 1 to 4 feet of snow in the southern Sierra. And on top of that, usually we get pretty strong winds with these storms. We do have high wind warnings in the high elevations. That means isolated power outages, Hallie, are also possible with this storm. Maybe gusts to 30 to 40, at most around 50 miles per hour. And here's the key. We're just showing you those flooding pictures. Right now, we like to look at the snowpack because that kind of gives us an idea of how much is going to melt. We're at the record highest measured snowpack in the southern Sierra. So all of that has to melt, in addition to the rainfall we keep getting. And so we're worried about these rivers in the weeks ahead. I'm sure we'll talk about this, Hallie, as we go throughout the month of April as all this snow melts. All of these rivers head into the Central Valley, and we'll have to see how bad it gets with the flooding.
So that is not good news for people out west. When will they get some relief, Bill? When do we think?
Well, typically the rainy season goes from the beginning of October through kind of the end of April, but usually it tails off significantly in the next couple of weeks. It does look like we're going to have about 2 or 3 more storms after this one, but weak ones, and then we should turn the drain, the spigot off, and hopefully we'll, melt everything slowly. If not, we'll be talking a lot more about it. You see this red area? That's where they're already saying the spring flood threat is in the moderate range. It goes minor, moderate, high. We'll see if they upgrade that in the days ahead.
Bill, Karen, thank you so much. Always good to see you. Appreciate it. So listen, if you know Ted Lasso, you know that he is a rather begrudging participant in therapy sessions on the show where Lasso is a soccer coach living overseas, dealing with stuff like divorce and childhood trauma and crippling anxiety. Now, the real-life actor who plays Lasso, Jason Sudeikis, there he is, taken to an even bigger stage to talk about how important mental health is, showing up at the White House, along with, look at all those famous people from one of the best shows on TV. They're meeting the president and they're meeting the press in the briefing room. Watch.
No matter who you are, no matter where you live, no matter who you voted for, we all probably, I assume, we all know someone who has, or have been that someone ourselves actually, that's struggled, that's felt isolated, that's felt anxious, that has felt alone, right? And it's actually one of the many things that believe it or not, that we all have in common as human beings.
Carol Lee is joining us now. Carol, this is obviously an issue that's important to the people who are on the show. That's why they showed up today to talk with the president. What was interesting is, like, at a moment like this, you'd think they'd want 1 billion cameras in, and obviously they came in front of the press briefing room. We didn't get a lot of access right behind the scenes in the West Wing. What do we know that came out of this meeting? What do you think we can expect?
Well, I think the whole goal, Hallie, was to just put a spotlight on this issue. Now, as you noted, the White House did not open this meeting up to any coverage. They're not saying exactly what happened during the meeting. So I don't think there's an expectation there's going to be new policies coming out of this meeting per se. But we know that the cast met with the president and first lady and talked about mental health issues. And I think going forward, what you can envision is perhaps some more social media attention, some videos that might have been taken behind the scenes, things like that. But really the goal was to put a spotlight on an issue that the president and this administration has tried to emphasize that they want to do things about. You know, he took office, President Biden did, in the middle of the pandemic. Mental health was a real issue for a lot of Americans, and at that time, and still is, particularly children. And so this was a way of putting a focus on that issue with some star power. Now, they didn't take any questions from us, but Trent was there, the reporter from Ted Lasso, and he got a question. The rest of us, not so much.
All you need to do is make it big on, like, one of the hottest shows in the country, Carol, to get a question, I guess, in. Any sort of memorable moments from it? I mean, there are many, obviously, and anything to talk about mental health and sort of erase some of the stigma around it is a good thing. What stood out to you?
Well, what stood out was when Jason Sudeikis started talking about what people can do to help others with mental health. And it was really simple. And it was, you know, just ask people how they're doing, check in with someone. And not only that, but listen to what they have to say, like really mean it. And talked about the stigma that can be there sometimes with people asking for help. And obviously that's dealt with in the show a lot. But he talked about how it's okay to ask for help and people really need to do that. And so those were some of the comments that I think will probably reverberate.
We're looking at some of the cast members. We were just showing it walking around on the driveway there, outside where the West Wing is. It looked like they were kind of taking it all in, too. I have to ask, because he's my favorite person on that show, Roy Kent. Any F-bombs from him, Carol, or did he keep it locked?
You know, he didn't speak in the briefing room, so he just stood there, but he kept that Roy face on, the very sort of together, stern. There were no smiles.
Got it. Well, one would never expect such a thing from Roy Kent. Carol Lee, thank you so much. It's good to see you on this. And listen, Carol talked about it. It's so important to get help if you are struggling. You are not alone. There are so many resources available. Look at the numbers listed here. Take a screen grab if you need it. Of course, you can always call 1-800-273-TALK if you need some help. That does it for this hour. More coverage picks up right now. Coming on the air with brand new comments just into us from the man who could be the last witness in front of a New York grand jury looking at alleged hush money payments made by former President Trump to an adult film star. We'll take you live outside that Manhattan courthouse where barricades are going up and police are getting ready for protests if a potentially historic indictment comes down. We're also just now hearing from officials in Miami Beach on a string of deadly shootings, why their push for a curfew has just in the last few seconds failed. Plus, Alec Murdaugh's son going on defense today with a statement first to NBC News, asking everybody to stop spreading rumors about him. We're going to explain that controversy coming up. And the CDC sounding the alarm on something that sounds like it's straight out of The Last of Us, a potentially deadly fungus that could be a real threat to certain folks. What you need to know. We've also got the first look at an exclusive interview from our team at the Today Show with the teacher shot by a 6-year-old student in Virginia. How she's feeling now, what she's telling our own Savannah Guthrie, coming up later in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and in the last hour, we are hearing from somebody who used to represent somebody else who used to represent Donald Trump. How's that? Right, a guy named Robert Costello, who testified to a grand jury in Manhattan. And if you're like, I don't know who Robert Costello is, here's what you need to know, that it is possible he's the last one to speak to this grand jury before they may possibly decide to indict Donald Trump. That would be history-making. We have never seen this before. We have never seen criminal charges against a former president. We may not see them, right? But if they do come down, Donald Trump seems to think it is going to be potentially tomorrow. You've got this guy, Robert Costello, attacking somebody else involved in this, Michael Cohen, blasting Michael Cohen's credibility, saying that he's got the receipts to show that Cohen, who used to represent Donald Trump, who's involved in this alleged hush money scheme, he's saying Cohen's a liar.
My only mission there today was to tell the truth about what Michael Cohen was saying at any point in time during the time that we were representing him. I wouldn't have touched a guy like Michael Cohen, especially if he's a convicted perjurer. Not to mention, as I said, the 50 to 100 lies he told us that are in those 330 emails.
That statement just in the last couple of minutes as he wrapped up his testimony in front of a grand jury, which is in turn seeming to be wrapping up its investigation into that alleged payment to former adult film star Stormy Daniels. And Michael Cohen was going to testify, too, as a rebuttal witness, but his lawyer is telling our team prosecutors didn't even need him. With the legal fallout still TBD, you've got the political piece of it that's just beginning to pick up speed, right? The city is getting ready for protests in New York because Mr. Trump has told his supporters to get out there and demonstrate. These are some of the barricades being brought at the Manhattan's DA's office. Mr. Trump says he didn't do anything wrong on this. He's making those denials clear on his Truth Social platform. And he's got some friends circling the wagons for him. His allies on Capitol Hill are sending a letter first obtained by NBC News asking that Manhattan DA to come in front of them, answer some questions. They're accusing him of interfering in the 2024 election, since Mr. Trump is, of course, a presidential candidate. There's also somebody else who could be a Republican presidential candidate, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, after days of silence, now going after the New York prosecutor.
And he chooses to go back many, many years ago to try to use something about porn star hush money payments. You know, that's an example of pursuing a political agenda and weaponizing the office.
We're going to break down the political context with our Hallie Vitale in a second, but I want to start with Gabe Gutierrez outside the courthouse in New York. Just saw this guy Costello, Robert Costello, come out with like a big packet of emails. He's like, I got 300 emails. He's bringing props, etc. He says Michael Cohen paid Stormy Daniels with his own money, that Mr. Trump didn't know about it. This is likely a preview of maybe the defense that the Trump team will put up if, in fact, he is indicted. And I got to tell you, Gabe, that's the question everybody wants to know. Is it going to happen, and is it going to happen this week?
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. That is the big question. And right now we're trying to get more clarity on what is the next step in this, whether, he was indeed the last witness. He was believed to be, but there could be another curveball, and we just don't know for sure at this point. But Robert Costello, as you mentioned a short time ago, holding up those more than 300 emails, he says, a communication between Michael Cohen and his law firm. He says that he was only asked about 6 of those emails, saying that they were cherry-picked out of context and seemed to be frustrated at the direction that prosecutors went during his grand jury testimony. He said that Michael Cohen was on a, quote, revenge tour, in his words, saying that he wanted to get back at former President Trump, that at one point he wanted to pay his legal bills, and that also Michael Cohen was trying to avoid jail time, was desperate, and would basically say anything to avoid that jail time. Of course, he did spend some time in jail, but at this point, Michael Cohen says that he is telling the truth and that it was Donald Trump that ordered him to pay Stormy Daniels that $130,000 in hush money. Robert Costello today reiterating that Cohen made that payment unbeknownst to Donald Trump. And earlier today, our team also spoke with Randy Davis, Michael Cohen's attorney. Take a listen to what he had to say.
The fact is that the federal prosecutors say that Michael Cohen was directed by the President of the United States. The fact is he signed checks while he was president in 2017 to repay Michael Cohen. That's undisputed. Whatever Mr. Costello or Mr. Trump supporters, they have a right to their opinions. I just stay on what are the facts.
And again, Robert Costello walking out of this courthouse, or driving out of this courthouse a short time ago, Hallie. And as you said, Michael Cohen expected to be here as a rebuttal witness. His lawyer tells NBC News that the prosecution said they didn't need him. Hallie?
Gabe, I'm looking at the corner where you're standing there. I imagine it is probably bike racks, generally, as far as the eye can see. Talk to me about the way that they are getting ready now, law enforcement is, for the possibility of protests. Are we seeing any materialize so far? What is the expectation? What's the vibe?
Well, it's funny you asked that, Hallie. Actually, just a short time ago, we have seen a few demonstrators, and I should stress a few. At this point, it's maybe a few dozen that have shown up here on the other side of the cameras here. And there have been steel barricades that were put up earlier in the day. And Hallie, over the last several days, our team has been speaking with several law enforcement agencies, and several sources have told NBC News that they are actively preparing for the logistical and security challenges that would come with this potential unprecedented indictment of a former president of the United States. Now, today, we did see those security barricades that had gone up. Certainly, there's a lot of media in this area. It's very tight here in this portion of Lower Manhattan. And certainly, it is something that law enforcement agencies are preparing for here. But again, we have not seen major protests materialize at this point. Just a few pro-Trump demonstrators tonight, organized by a local group, that are showing up with a few signs. However, nothing major so far. We do not have any indication, Hallie. Of course, the former president saying over the weekend that he expected protests and was calling for protests tomorrow when he predicted he might be arrested. We have not seen anything of that materialize so far. The big question, of course, on everyone's mind, when could a potential indictment be handed down?
And I have to say, I think there's a lot of people who are going, okay, well, Donald Trump said tomorrow seems to be the day. His team has also clarified it's not like they say they have gotten some formal notification, at least not as of like 24 hours ago. So it could, even though Mr. Trump says tomorrow, it could also not be tomorrow. I just want to make that clear, right? I mean, truly, we just don't know.
That's a very strong point, Hallie. His spokesperson later clarified that he did not have direct knowledge. It could be, and I'm speculating here, it could be that he heard that a potential witness was the last witness could be coming today on Monday, and perhaps he thought something could happen on Tuesday. But that has not been confirmed. We do not have a firm timeline on when that indictment could come or if it will happen at all.
That's a great point. Gabe Gutierrez in the thick of it there in New York. Gabe, thank you very much. Let's go to Hallie Vitale, who is in Florida now, in Orlando, where Republicans are, Hallie, for their annual retreat. We now have this letter by some key committee chairs we showed at the top of the program here. And they're like, hey, Alvin Bragg, Manhattan District Attorney, right, who might indict Trump, come on and answer some questions to us. The chair of the House Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan, is talking about this. Tell us more about this dynamic here, because they're asking him to come talk to them in what seems to be a political play here rather than a legal one.
Yeah, Hallie, they're asking in a little bit sterner terms than, hey, come talk to us.
Well, yeah.
The gist of it is right in that they are asking, not demanding, which is to say they're asking, not subpoenaing, at least not right now. And this is a little bit more of the Jim Jordan rationale on this, just one of the three chairmen who are signed on to this letter. Listen to what he told us.
President Trump announces he's running for re-election, and shazam, no, now we're going to pursue it. And we want to know were federal funds involved? Did this stem from? It sure looks like it grew out of the special counsel investigation, because those are the legislative concerns we have as Congress.
So Jordan there, Hallie, clearly trying to connect this to all of the other Trump investigations, despite the fact that it is decidedly different and not part of impeachment or any of the things that happened in Congress during the Trump years. But this is the talking point that they are rallying around here. I think just broadly speaking, if we look at this, we were always going to be talking about Trump and to a slightly lesser extent DeSantis at this House Republican retreat. It's not why we're here, but you go to the belly of the beast in Florida when two Florida men are ostensibly the future and standard bearers of the party. They're going to be part of the conversation. I do think, though, that House Republican leaders here may have underestimated the amount that Trump would dominate, especially in light of this news, which, of course, we didn't see coming until we were squarely on our way to Florida.
Yeah, seriously. You know, what's also interesting here is the way that some of the lawmakers are framing on the conservative, on the Republican side, saying, hey, Alvin Bragg, they're saying to this DA, you could be interfering with the 2024 election since you're talking about somebody who's running for president.
Right.
Donald Trump himself himself. I'm old enough to remember back when he said he could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and his base wouldn't leave him. I mean, it is a real, but like politically, right? I mean, he is defending himself tonight on Truth Social. He's putting out these videos going after Alvin Bragg. And the expectation, he is fundraising off of it because the expectation is that his supporters will remain with him. I don't have to tell you, he will need more than simply his base to be able to win in a general election come 24.
Yeah, but you know what? To get to a general, you've got to go through a primary. And that is what every Republican operative that I've been talking to is more than fully aware of. Whether their candidate's not officially in yet or thinking about getting in, they're aware of polling numbers that look like the ones that I can pull up for you on the screen. There have been so many moments that were critical inflection points in the Trump era where there was an expectation that there would be a bleed of support. Specifically, January 6th is one of those. You see the way that that really hasn't changed. The same after the Mar-a-Lago search of his home that found hundreds of classified documents in places that they shouldn't be. But that 30-some-odd% is actually the percent that everyone who's trying to strategize around Trump right now actually bakes in when they figure out their strategy, which is to say, if 30-some-odd% of the party is always going to be with him and is unmovable, how do they move around for the other 70-ish%? And that's the open question for the rest of this would-be Republican field as you think about the larger politics landscape, is how do they get those voters without alienating some of that 30-some-odd%?
Hallie Vitale, live for us there in Orlando, covering it all. Hallie, thank you. Today, the Biden administration says they hope that the Chinese president can get the Russian president to stop bombing Ukraine and stop committing war crimes against civilians. As China's Xi Jinping kicks off this very important, very closely watched three-day visit to Moscow with this guy you see on your screen, Vladimir Putin. The concern, though, is that they'll keep promoting a ceasefire that may not be good for Ukraine in the long run. Here's the National Security Council spokesperson.
Any ceasefire that does not address the removal of Russian forces from Ukraine would effectively ratify Russia's illegal conquests.
You see Xi and Putin today meeting in Moscow for the first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and each country wants something out of this meeting. China wants this as an opportunity to reestablish itself or to establish itself as a global leader. Russia wants this show of solidarity against the West, especially after the International Criminal Court issued a warrant for Putin's arrest for war crimes in Ukraine. Keir Simmons is joining us now. Very complicated international picture today. A big welcome for Xi. The two spent hours and hours talking today. Where is this going? Where does this lead?
Yeah, Hallie, they say in international politics that there's no such thing as allies, just interests. And that's certainly true with Russia and China. Effectively, they need each other. Russia is a massive neighbor to China. It can't afford to see Russia collapse. It doesn't want to see President Putin overthrown. But there is also this personal chemistry between President Xi and President Putin that's once again visible when you see the two of them together in the Kremlin there on the world stage. And they do have a lot to talk about. I mean, you mentioned the White House's concerns. I mean, that concern that they will try to announce some kind of a armistice, some kind of a ceasefire that actually doesn't involve Russia withdrawing from Ukraine. And then the other worry, of course, is the kind of picture that they're trying to paint. And we saw this statement from President Xi talking about the two countries supporting each other in upholding world norms. Of course, what they mean by that is opposing America's view of the way the world should work and trying to sustain their own idea that every country has its own rights, whether it's democracy or not. And you get those kind of ideological arguments between the two sides. But clearly, Russia and China agree with each other on many of these things. And that's another way in which you're seeing this kind of alliance between them. So it is stunning. It's a diplomatic victory for President Putin. On the other hand, President Xi is trying to be more of a diplomat. Why? Because he has those very important economic ties to Europe and America. He wants to sustain those while at the same time supporting Russia and asserting himself on the world stage.
You talk about this alignment between China and Russia, Keir. What the U.S. wants to see is China at least listening to the other, obviously, nation that is deeply involved in this, Ukraine, because they're getting attacked by Russia. They want Xi basically to hear from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. What do you put the odds on that?
Yeah, I think that will happen. But, I mean, of course, the US and NATO and the West wants President Xi to talk to President Zelensky, because President Zelensky will tell President Xi that Russia needs to withdraw from Ukraine before there can be any kind of a deal. So that's the message that the West really wants China to hear. And also, there's something else which is a clear message they're trying to send to China, which is don't supply weapons to Russia, because if you do, you'll have Europe turn against you if you aren't able to do it in some kind of a clandestine way. And clearly, so far, China has not managed to do that. Just the very fact they've been considering it has been made public by the US. So there is another aspect to that too. But I think there will be that conversation between the Ukrainian leader and the president of China, because, again, China is trying to walk this tightrope to try to seem like a peacemaker whilst at the same time being this strong partner to Russia. I mean, it is very challenging, actually, when you think about it diplomatically for China.
Keir Simmons, thank you very much for staying on top of all of it. I know we'll talk again more, I'm sure, in the next couple of days. Appreciate it. So in just the last couple of minutes, after nearly 2 hours of debate, Miami Beach commissioners failed to pass a curfew for this upcoming weekend after a deadly weekend of shootings. They had considered doing something maybe that started at midnight on Thursday. It sounds like that is not going to happen. Spring break, of course, is in full swing in Miami, but even with no curfew, these officials are saying, hey, more has to be done. Enough is enough. Listen.
We have been through this scene for several years in a row. How many times? It is never going to be okay for me to see a dead person on our street. These are people with families, with friends who are in mourning right now.
This is after 2 shootings each killed one person and hurt another. Both suspects have been caught. You see people running away from where near the shootings had happened. They happen on Ocean Drive. If you know Miami Beach, this is like the main drag, right? This is where people go out. This is it. It's like where the bars and the restaurants are. Officials are just done. Like, they are done with it. The Miami Beach mayor is saying, hey, they didn't ask for this. They didn't ask for spring break in Miami. And this has been a problem for Miami Beach right around spring break time for the last couple of years when the city's had to put in place states of emergency. So let's bring in Guad Venegas, who is in Miami Beach. What's interesting is that they did not pass a curfew now. We're just learning, Guad, for this coming weekend. Why not? Why did this vote fail? Help us understand it.
Hallie, that's correct. So when you look at this area on Ocean Drive, these are restaurants, these are nightclubs, businesses that are usually open after midnight. In fact, if you want to go out in Miami and stay out all night, this is the area where businesses remain open.
Too.
So you can understand. Exactly. And you can understand the effects to people that are used, these businesses that are used to having that clientele. But Hallie, I had a really interesting conversation just a minute ago with a business owner here who said, well, we expect the crowd to be different next weekend. There's a large music festival here known as Ultra. That music festival attracts a specific crowd that the business owner said when that crowd is in town, they don't see as much violence. So for that reason, he told me he was happy that this state of emergency and curfew won't be in effect next weekend because they don't expect things to be the same. That was his opinion as a business owner. So, the commissioners and city officials had to consider what could happen next week, and they had to consider how these businesses would be affected. But, of course, we'll have to wait and see. And, the conversation was not just to see if the state of emergency would continue, Hallie, but also what else can be done to prevent this violence from happening moving forward.
What's also interesting is you're hearing some officials say, like, and I'm not to these words to this effect, but basically saying they want to cancel spring break in Miami. Like, they don't want to do spring break in Miami. They didn't ask for this kind of thing. That is an interesting comment, especially because you think spring breakers want a couple of things, right? They want good bars, good beaches, like hot people, right? Miami has all of that in abundance. It's hard to see how folks are going to stop showing up for spring break down the road here, Guad.
They are saying that, but, they also said that the spring breakers that come to Miami to spring break are not the ones involved in the violent attacks that we saw. These are the spring breakers go to the beach, they have a good time, and they drink, but they don't come out to this area and bring guns. This is something that they were also mentioning. Essentially here, the most difficult thing for officials, Hallie, has been keeping the guns away. So they discussed the possibility of bringing in metal detectors moving forward. But then again, there's other things have to be considered like constitutional rights when having metal detectors in public. So the city attorney said, well, maybe we can have a ticketed event. And you can imagine the logistics of fencing off this entire area, installing metal detectors, and they would do something like charge $1 per ticket so that everyone has to go to a paid event and go through these metal detectors. That, of course, is very ambitious and just some of the ideas that they are discussing moving forward, because as you mentioned, they are tired of the violence. And you do have the messaging saying the people that only want a spring break are not the ones involved in the violent attacks. But the mayor is also saying we don't want the spring breakers. So it's difficult for them to deal with this because, Hallie, you also have businesses that thrive on the clients that come to spring break. So it's a very difficult decision moving forward economically and also when it comes to public safety.
That's a great point. Guavenegas, who is, of course, not far from that main drag there in Miami Beach. Guad, thank you. The market's closing in the green today. How's that for a sentence we don't say often? With Wall Street holding out a hope for a rebound for banks after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank about a week ago. That's after we learned that Credit Suisse would be taken over by a different giant bank. Credit Suisse have been having some problems, so investors clearly welcome that good news. And it all comes to tee up, if you will, a decision in just about 48 hours or so from now from the Federal Reserve on whether or not to raise interest rates yet again. And yes, another hike is expected. Investopedia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver is here for us. What is the expectation then for the Fed meeting? I mean, I think every signal so far points to, yes, there is going to be a rate hike. The question is how much? Yeah, but maybe a spring awakening for stocks and maybe some optimism that the Fed may only hike rates 0.25%, if at all. But it's the language we want to listen to from Fed Chair Powell on Wednesday. Is it a softening? Is it a more dovish language? Are they going to ease the pace of interest rates or at least stop going forward? That's enough for investors to want to get optimistic and start buying stocks again, because it's been a rough about 13, 14 months for the stock market. A lot of investors hiding in cash, looking for reasons to believe, and maybe they'll get that reason this Wednesday because the banking issues have really added another cloud to the market. Those look like they're kind of orderly at the moment. I was just going to ask you. Yeah, I was just going to say, Caleb, is the financial bank drama that we've followed for 8 days now, like, does that seem to be I want to say chilling out, but you know what I mean? Does that seem to be fading away into the recent past? Yeah, well, we didn't have another bank failure today. That's good news. But we also have some banks that are in some serious trouble. We did see a big rebound in the stock prices of regional banks. They've been clobbered for the past 10 days or so. Most of them had a huge rebound today. Not First Republic, which is in the throes of a real problem now because it's now having J.P. Morgan advise it on the way forward. Is he going to issue new shares? This was a really healthy bank a couple of years ago. Right now, it looks like it's in real trouble. The rest of the sector, the banking sector, did pretty well today, and the overall market did very well as well. Caleb, thank you very much. Good to see you. We are bringing you now a new report, a new alarm sounding from the CDC. This deadly, potentially, infection that comes from a fungus that could be dangerous if you're older, if you're in poor health, like if you have a parent or a grandparent in a nursing home, maybe. It sounds like something straight out of like a script, right? This fungal infection called C. auris that could put people at risk of some pretty serious health complications. Cases are now in more than 20 states. What's behind it? Our reporting shows possibly climate change. It's according to researchers at Johns Hopkins who say a gradual rise in the Earth's temperature, basically global warming, has made the Earth warmer. That means that the fungi in this infection can grow more easily. NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres is with us now. Not to be alarmist here, because yes, do people think of The Last of Us when they look at like deadly fungal infection and whatever? Sure, this is still rare. If you are generally in good health, it is probably not going to be an issue for you. But the big concern for doctors, right, is that this infection is pretty resistant to drugs. That's the concern, is how do you treat it if you get it?
And Hallie, at this point, you're exactly right. If you're in good health, if you have a good immune system that's fairly strong, then you're not really at risk of this. But those loved ones you might have, or people that might be in nursing homes or assisted living type facilities, could have issues with this. And making the dots connected here is not that difficult, and it ends at global warming. And what we think has been happening is this Candida auris has been around for thousands of years, and it mostly has not affected humans up until recently. And we think part of the reason it's starting to affect humans, especially in the numbers we're seeing over the last 5 or 6 years or so, is because of global warming. Because what happens is typically this type of fungus only grows in cooler environments. It can't grow inside our 98.6 degree temperature of our bodies. But because of global warming, this fungus has adapted to warmer environments, which means it's adapted more to our bodies. And we think that might be going on as time progresses over the next decade or so if we don't get this global warming under control. And it's not just this fungus, it's other fungi as well that could be causing issues. And so we need to be careful with that, Hallie.
What are folks supposed to do to protect themselves? Because part of the concern here is doctors, I know, are thinking about things like, hey, what if this becomes the next MRSA, right? Which is also that drug-resistant infection that people can get sometimes.
And we're already seeing drug resistance with this fungus, and so that's a big concern as well. But to protect yourself, essentially, it's the same advice of staying as healthy as possible. But if you have a loved one in a nursing home or some type of acute care facility, then you do have to be careful with them. And one of the things to ask the facility is, how are you cleaning, or what are you doing for clean procedures? Because what we do know is this is being passed from patient to patient through healthcare workers, and not on purpose, but inadvertently. And we think during the pandemic, because of some of the issues and some of the procedures that were set up for the pandemic to try and prevent COVID, are opposite of what we need to try and prevent this type of fungus. And so now that we're winding down the pandemic here, it's not over, but we're getting to that point. Then the authors of the study say, hey, we need to go ahead and beef up our clean procedures to make sure that we protect ourselves from this as well. And so simply talk to the facility and say, are you not just worried about COVID? Are you also worried about this fungus? And what are you doing to make sure that my patient, my loved one, stays protected, Hallie?
Dr. John Torres, thank you very much. Coming up here on the show, Alec Murdaugh's son, Buster, defending himself to NBC News, saying he's got nothing to do with somebody else's hit-and-run death. What that person's family is now saying about questions around his death. Plus, why a bunch of states say Kia and Hyundai are not doing enough to stop their cars from getting stolen. That's coming up in 5 Things. New rankings are out on the happiest place on earth. Spoiler, it is not Disney, but we'll tell you where the U.S. stands on that list. You may be surprised later on this hour. But first, Buster Murdaugh, the son of convicted double murderer Alec Murdaugh, is going on defense today, proverbially speaking, saying that the attention shouldn't be on him, while the family of a South Carolina man found dead in 2015 works to re-examine the cause of his death. In a new statement, Buster Murdaugh, in this statement first to NBC, is denying any involvement in the death of Stephen Smith and asks that media outlets, in his words, stop publishing defamatory comments and rumors about me. Smith was 19 when police found him dead on a road 15 miles from the Murdaugh home. We want to be clear, NBC News has not confirmed this, but there's been speculation in documentaries on Netflix and HBO from people who knew these two that Buster and Stephen went to the same high school, that they may have known each other or maybe even had some kind of a relationship, like an intimate relationship. That's led to all kinds of theories, none of which have been fully substantiated, making a connection between Buster and Stephen Smith's death. The medical examiner said Smith died from a hit and run, but Smith's mother says she is not buying it. She is now working to have her son's body exhumed via a GoFundMe page that's raised nearly $70,000. She hopes an independent examiner will find any more evidence about her son's death. The lawyers for the Smith family, they're trying to be clear about one thing, that their work to reopen this case is not about Buster Murdaugh or the Murdaugh family. Listen.
This is not about Buster Murdaugh. So this is about Stephen Smith. This is about trying to get answers to questions that his mother desperately needs answers for. So there's no reason to discuss Buster Murdaugh, and there's no comment to make back to Buster Murdaugh.
This is all coming less than a month after Buster's father, Alec Murdaugh, of course, was found guilty of murdering his wife and son. And again, Buster Murdaugh has not been charged with any crimes in this case. NBC's Katie Beck is following this story for us. Okay, Katie, so talk us through what we know about why you have Buster Murdaugh, the reps, coming out now to put out this statement and to sort of push back on what they see as all this media attention.
Well, I think now that Smith's family is making this push for the independent investigation and another autopsy, I think Murdaugh had sort of seen this come to a head before and said, listen, I've been trying to live my life in privacy. I've been grieving the death of my mother and my brother, saying in this statement, even the incarceration of his father, he's trying to cope with that. And he says, in his words, he has been targeted and he has been harassed by these possible insinuations that he had something to do with this. So I think seeing where this was going and seeing seeing the attention that this cold case is getting, this renewed interest after the Murdoch trial. I think he just wanted to put out there finally and unequivocally that in his own words, he had nothing to do with these, that they're baseless rumors, and then go back to living a private life and go back to grieving, as he says, missing his brother and his mother terribly, in his own words.
Talk to us about then the sort of Smith family's perspective here, because there's all this money being raised to exhume Stephen Smith's body, to have it re-examined. And thinking through the end goal here, is this not something that investigators had thought to do previously? Or like, what is the, in this instance, what is the latest, if there's anything that we're hearing from the police side of things, from the law enforcement side of things, given these developments?
Yeah, sure. SLED has said that this case is ongoing. They are making progress. We have heard nothing from them about any plans to do any exhumations. In terms of the Smith family, what they're going to have to do is get the permission of a judge. It is really in a judge's hands to decide whether or not that can happen. They have to, through their lawyers, petition the court and ask for permission to exhume the body of Stephen Smith. Once the judge signs off on that, they will privately do that exhumation and then do another autopsy with an independent pathologist. That is their hope, that their request will be approved. In the meantime, Smith's mother says that she still lives every day with this open question of not knowing and really believing that this was not a hit and run, that this was a murder, that her son was targeted, and she wants to know the who and the why. Here's what she said to us in our interview.
As a mother, there's questions that I need to ask, and there's questions I need answers to. Peace, not closure. It'll never be closed because he's forever gone.
Now, they have raised, as you said, quite a bit of money, Hallie, over $70,000 at this point in this GoFundMe account to try and, support these efforts of an independent review and a new autopsy. But Stephen Smith's mother says even if they get denied the access to do this exhumation, they will put that money towards a scholarship fund in Stephen's name. That is the plan if, in fact, they are not given permission to do what they want to do here.
Katie Beck, thank you very much for bringing us up to speed and for staying on top of this story. Appreciate it. You can catch more of Katie's reporting on Nightly News tonight with Lester Holt, 6:30 Eastern. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the Supreme Court hearing arguments today on a case that could have a big effect on a lot of people in the Navajo Nation and their water rights. The Native American tribe says a treaty they signed back in the 1800s with the U.S. should give them access to fresh water from the Colorado River. If the court agrees, the government may have to divert some of the water from that river, which is already running low, to the reservation. Number 2, Amazon announcing more layoffs today, saying 9,000 people will be let go. That's on top of the 18,000 the company already laid off in January. Number 3, a jury in Florida today found 3 men guilty for the murder of rapper XXXTentacion. He was just 20 years old when he was shot in a town outside Miami in 2018. All 3 men pleaded not guilty, but were convicted of first-degree murder and armed robbery. Number 4, a deadly weekend for skiers out in Colorado. An avalanche killing 1 man Sunday near Aspen. He was with 2 others who managed to survive. A day earlier, officials recovered the body of another skier who was killed in an avalanche. Number 5, officials from nearly 24 states want Hyundai and Kia to address a whole bunch of car thefts. They want the car makers to do more to protect their cars after thousands of them have been stolen from places across the country recently. Still to come here on the show, top scientists say a lot still needs to happen to stop what they're calling a climate time bomb, who they think will suffer the most if big changes don't happen now, this decade. We're getting into it next. One of the biggest and most definitive UN reports ever warns it is now or never if we want to stop climate change from getting worse and make sure that the planet we all live on can still be lived on in the future. Watch.
Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast. This report is a clarion call to massively fast-track climate efforts by every country and every sector and on every time frame.
Listen, right? We talk about climate change reports like this a lot, and that's fine, right? I mean, they're important here, but sometimes do they feel like a blur? Not this one, right? This stands out as it's the product of 6 years of research from thousands of scientists. And here's what it says, that the world is inching closer and closer to catastrophic heat levels, that the international goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius as part of the Paris Climate Agreement, That's probably going to slip out of reach because of this. Climate change will become more unmanageable, they say. People won't be able to keep up and adapt with natural disasters. Major heat waves, more hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, the list goes on. There's still some hope here, though. If you're like, oh my, like, whoa, that's just so heavy. Scientists say we're actually not doomed, but we have to do something. We have to do something fast. They're calling this new report a how-to guide on how to do exactly that. Do something quickly and stop what they call a climate time bomb. Of course, the big question is, will we? Let's bring in Bill Cairns now. Walk us through some more of the highlights from this report and who the UN says climate change is hurting most.
Hallie, today was the equivalent of climate scientists who are kind of known as being kind of quiet and geeky in their corner. They were yelling from the rooftop. I mean, that was what this report really was. And let's talk first about why they were yelling. So let's start with CO2 in our atmosphere. This is the last 55 years. It's going up. It hasn't started going down. This lasts in the atmosphere for 1,000 years, up to 1,000 years. So when I start my car up and it burns the gas, what comes out of that tailpipe will be here for like 10 generations after me in the atmosphere. That's the huge issue in this whole math equation. And then methane, same thing. Methane's going up. Doesn't last in the atmosphere as long, but we had a record annual increase in the last 2 years. And we got this animation to show you just the last 23 years of the carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere. It gets darker in color as more carbon dioxide's in the atmosphere. And you can see the trend where we're going here, and we're just going up and up. So this is why all the climate scientists were putting out this dire report today. So let's get into what the report actually said and what it was showing today. So for one of the first times, the strongest wordings they've used, human activities have unequivocally caused global warming. In the past, they were kind of a little wish-washy on that. No question whatsoever. Everyone agrees human activities have caused it. And the temperature so far has gone up 2 degrees. Now, to meet the Paris goal, it would have to be under 2.7. This is the first time that they have said that is unlikely. They're not giving up on it, but they're saying that's very unlikely. And one of the points you're going to keep hearing a lot about in the decades to come and years to come is climate justice. Here's just a couple of the quotes. Vulnerable communities who have historically contributed the least are disproportionately affected. In other words, the countries that aren't using the most gas, oil, electricity, the most global emissions, those are the ones that are dealing with the worst flooding, the worst heat waves. And they're also the slowest to adapt. The wealthy nations that are producing the most, like us and China and India, those are starting to adapt because we have the money to do so. But they're saying global finance flows for adaptation are insufficient, especially in those developing countries, Hallie. So the poorest nations are the ones being hurt the worst, but doing the least.
What's the hope factor, right? Like, are we, because I think for some folks, it's probably hard to listen to this and be like, all right, well, like, then we're all doomed. We're all in trouble. Like, what's the hope factor? Where's the thing that is like the action step that gives us some hope that things could change?
Well, they don't want anyone just to give up because the warmer the planet gets, the worse it's going to keep going. So this is a lot of lines on this map. So where we are now is right here with the blue X. That's where we are. In order to meet the Paris goals, we'd have to cut emissions in the next 7 years 50% lower. That's why they're saying it's unlikely. We haven't even cut. We're still going up, let alone cut 50%. So what you're going to start hearing now is this next goal is to limit it to 2 degrees Celsius, which is 3.6. Remember, right now we've warmed up 2. If we just do what we're currently doing, this red line right here, by the year 2100, so in other words, if someone's born today and they have a good life and they live that long, the planet will warm up another 5 degrees from right now if we do nothing. In our lifetimes, it's warmed up about 1 to 2 degrees. That's a significant change, and that's why the whole urgency, and this was probably the strongest quote that I saw in the report that I read today, climate change is a threat to human well-being and planetary health. There's a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. I mean, that's about as strong as wording, Hallie, as you possibly can have.
Yeah. Bill Cairns, it's an important report. Glad you're breaking it down for us. Thank you very much. Still to come, Richard Engel is back in Baghdad 20 years after the U.S. invaded Iraq. We're looking back on how it started and what has changed since then. Next. So tomorrow night, the Dallas Stars hockey team will host Pride Night with players set to hit the ice for warm-ups in Pride-themed jerseys. They'll use some rainbow tape on their sticks, too. At least that's the plan. But on Saturday night, the goalie for the San Jose Sharks, James Reimer, chose to sit out warm-ups rather than wear the Pride gear. He says because of his Christian faith. Back in January, it was a player for the Philadelphia Flyers, Ivan Provorov, who's Russian, who also did not participate in Pride Night warm-ups, also because of religious concerns. Some teams decided that no player should wear the Pride jerseys at all, like the New York Rangers. In January, they left those jerseys in the locker room during warm-ups, saying in a statement, "We support everyone's individual right to respectfully express their beliefs." Same with the Minnesota Wild, which said it made the decisions that the players who chose not to didn't draw the attention away from the true reason behind the night. Mark Lazarus, senior writer for The Athletic, is joining us now. Mark, explain what's going on here. Why is Pride Night becoming apparently semi-controversial in the National Hockey League?
Yeah, they've been doing these Pride Nights for a number of years now, and it's never been an issue before. But then you have, when Ivan Provorov sat out back in January, it became a big deal. The Flyers are leaders in this space. Captain Scott Lawton among them, spoke out that this means a lot to us. We're still going to go out there and wear the jerseys. It's not a big ask. It's just during warmups. It's not during the game. They put some rainbow tape on their stick. They auction off the stick and the jerseys and for charity. And it's a nice event, and it's been going on for years. But now, since the Provorov situation, now you have a lot of teams that are doing this. Like you mentioned, the Wild and the Rangers chose not to completely. And part of that, they're citing there's a draconian Russian law against, LGBTQ so-called propaganda. Some players are worried about their families at home, certainly a legitimate reason. Some people are citing their religious beliefs, and some teams are choosing to protect their teammate from some bad PR rather than support the cause. When the Sharks, when James Reimer sat out, what was encouraging was Logan Couture's out there saying this still matters to us, and the team went out there and still wore the jerseys.
Go back to something you said that was interesting on the Russian connection here to this. Explain that a little bit more. Pull that thread.
Well, there's certainly a sizable Russian presence in the NHL. A lot of the game's big stars, Kirill Kaprizov in Minnesota being one of them. And Kaprizov had a harrowing ordeal last offseason trying to get out of Russia, when the war broke out with Ukraine. So there are certainly legitimate reasons to be worried. If you have family back in Russia, some players are worried about saying anything about, the war or anything about Putin for fear of any kind of retaliation or the inability to go back home. But plenty of Russian players have worn these jerseys too, and there's been no documentation of any incidents happening. Whether they're really paying attention to, an NHL regular season game warm-up or not seems debatable.
What is also interesting here is the way that different professional sports leagues in this country are handling social issues in different ways, right? You think about the NFL, let's say, and the way that they've handled social justice issues. The NBA, where some players have been really outspoken on issues like Black Lives Matter. What have you seen from the LGBTQ plus community as it relates to some of these questions around Pride Night in the Hockey League?
They're disappointed. They're frustrated. They're not surprised. The NHL has long had kind of a hard right streak in it, for lack of a better term. It's a more conservative league. It's a very, very white-dominated league. It's, it doesn't look like the NBA. The WNBA has been leaders in this space. NBA has, NFL, like you said. The NHL made some, kind of token gestures during the summer of 2020 after George Floyd. There's the Hockey Diversity Alliance is out there now trying to make some headway in this space with, some prominent players and some former players. But the NHL, it's odd because the NHL has this "hockey is for everyone" campaign. In a lot of ways, they've been, out in the front in this arena, trying to, make their fan base more welcoming, create more entry points for fans to feel comfortable in a hockey setting. But then events like this it sets everything back, and you have people wondering, how do I love a sport that doesn't love me back?
Mark Lazarus with The Athletic. Mark, thank you so much. It is so interesting. We'll see what happens, of course, tomorrow night in Dallas. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our foreign desk has done it for you. Here's some of what they're keeping an eye on in a new segment we call The Global. From Niger, an American held hostage in West Africa for more than 6 years is now free. Jeff Woodkey, who's from California, was kidnapped from his home in the northern part of the country back in 2016, where he was an aid worker. It's believed he was taken by an ISIS-connected group. Woodkey's wife says she had no idea he was about to be released, according to a family spokesperson. The family says he's in great spirits, obviously thrilled to be free. From Israel, on Friday, we told you about the protests happening there over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to overhaul the judicial system. Protesters say his plan would get rid of checks and balances in the country. But now, Mr. Netanyahu seems to be shifting his position after a phone call with President Biden, where the president encouraged him to soften his stance and maybe find a middle ground. From Finland, we are finding out today that They are the world's happiest country for the 6th year in a row, according to the World Happiness Report rankings. It's based on how satisfied people say they are with their lives. So number 1 is Finland, then it's Denmark, Iceland, and Israel. You know where the U.S. is on that list? Guess. Think of a new number in your head. It's not Bert says 10, our floor director. It's actually 15, Bert. Number 15, the U.S. on that list. It's been 20 years since the U.S. invaded Iraq, launching what would become an 8-year war to try to take down Saddam Hussein, setting off 2 decades of instability in that country and changing the lives of millions of Iraqis. About 200,000 civilians and nearly 4,500 U.S. service members died in that war, with bombings and kidnappings basically becoming an everyday thing. There's still a lot of corruption in the Iraqi government even now, scars from the war running deep, but there are also signs of hope. Markets are buzzing again. Groups of tourists are traveling across the country, some without security. Richard Engel has more.
It was 20 years ago that the United States and coalition allies invaded Iraq. The invasion began with shock and awe, a massive air campaign to take out Iraqi air defenses, take out the government, so that U.S. troops could start their long march through the desert from Kuwait until they ultimately arrived here in Baghdad. And this became an iconic square. I was here at the time, and the reason it was iconic was because it was right here where there was a massive statue of Saddam Hussein. And it was here until Iraqis and then American troops pulled it down. And this is all that's left of it, just a tiny fragment of the base. There's no markings on it. Most Iraqis don't remember Saddam fondly. The war was traumatic for them because while they were happy to be rid of a dictator, they suddenly found themselves in the midst of a civil war. It was traumatic for the United States as well, because Americans were told, the troops were told, that they were coming here, that this war was necessary because Saddam was hiding weapons of mass destruction that were never found because they didn't exist. Instead, the U.S. presence here, by toppling Saddam Hussein, they unleashed a sectarian war, religious bloodletting between Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims, and tens of thousands of Iraqis were killed. That civil war is now over. Security is starting to come back. Iraqis are much, much safer, but there are still deep problems here. There's a lot of corruption, and there is a lot of Iranian influence, and you can see it right here. That poster behind me, while Saddam's statue is gone, that poster overlooking the square is of Qasem Soleimani, one of Iran's top generals who was killed by a U.S. drone strike. And many Iraqis will say what the U.S. did over the course of the last 2 decades was overthrow a dictator, start a sectarian war that everyone here hated, and open the door for Iran's influence.
Still to come, for the first time, we are hearing from the Virginia elementary school teacher who was shot by a student earlier this year. She is speaking exclusively only with our own Savannah Guthrie. We've got a preview of that conversation coming up right after this break. Abigail Zwerner, the elementary school teacher who was shot by her 6-year-old student in Virginia back in January, is now speaking publicly for the very first time since that shooting happened. She is giving that first interview exclusively to our own Savannah Guthrie. It'll air tomorrow morning on the Today Show, but we have a preview for it right here, airing first on NBC News Now. Watch.
How do you feel? How is your recovery going?
I've been doing okay. You know, it's been challenging. I've gone through a lot of obstacles and challenges. Some days are not so good days where I can't get up out of bed. Some days are better than others where I'm able to get out of bed and make it to my appointments. But, you know, from going through what I've gone through, I try to stay positive, you know, try to have a positive outlook on what's happened and where my future's heading.
You probably remember that Zwerner was shot in the hand and chest in her first grade classroom. She was in the hospital for nearly 2 weeks. That 6-year-old will not face charges, and Zwerner's attorney says she plans to sue the school district. NBC News legal analyst Angela Senadella joins us now. So, Angela, here's what that lawyer told Savannah. Listen.
You intend to file a lawsuit in this case. Who do you think should face legal consequences in this matter?
There were failures on multiple levels in this case, and there were adults that were in positions of authority that could have prevented this tragedy from happening and did not. I will tell you that the complaint is drafted, and I do intend to file it in 2 weeks. I've met with the attorneys for both the school board and the City of Newport News, and they're going to have to respond in court.
Now, the context of those allegations against the school district are laid out in an intent to sue letter that the attorney sent out. NBC News is reaching out to the district about this. We have not heard back yet. In the past, they've told us they have no comment. Help us understand where this suit could go next once this lawyer files it.
Well, it sounds pretty clearly like it'll be some form of a negligence lawsuit, which basically means that the school district had this duty of care to protect the employees who were there, like this teacher, obviously breached that duty in some way, and then as a result, she was harmed, and that damages can be quantifiable. So basically what that means is that they are going to be alleging to the school district, look, someone here did something they weren't supposed to do or didn't do something that they were supposed to do, and as a result, this teacher was unfortunately the victim of this tragedy. So we could possibly see a settlement, as we've seen in the past in Minnesota. There was a similar lawsuit with the Red Lake school shooting. But we could also see, on the other hand, something that happened like in Oxford High School, where the Michigan court actually dismissed the lawsuit, saying that it was just the shooter who was really most responsible. It wasn't the school district. So it's really impossible to tell based on these facts whether or not it will be in her favor or not. But we'll see what happens.
We sure will. Angela Sanadella, thank you very much for that. Remember, you can watch the entire interview with Abigail Zwerner tomorrow morning on the Today Show, her and Savannah Guthrie one-on-one. That is tomorrow morning, wherever you watch your local NBC News station. Don't miss it. Thanks for joining us for this hour. We're going to have a lot more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place, right here on NBC News Now. More to come, of course. Keep it locked to this channel with Top Story with Tom Yamas that picks up in just a couple of seconds.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.